Welcome, everybody, into JC and Morgan, the podcast, the college football podcast you've come to know and love, or maybe you're just beginning to know and love it. And if so, we'll be very gentle and delicate throughout the next hour or so. It is episode number 172. He is JC Sherbert of 24/7 Sports. I am Mike Morgan of ESPN, the SEC network, and this week as well, some NFL on radio. In fact, JC and I got to meet after calling a 49ers Bears game. I got to see JC and the future Mrs. JC in the Windy City. More on that in a moment. Michael Haney is our fearless producer. He's in the Music City, and I'm in Atlanta. So we've got Atlanta to Nashville to Chicago. We've got it covered. We are all covered. And hopefully we've got you covered coast to coast, no matter where you're listening to this podcast. Lots to talk about. And, particularly this type of year where it's less interviews and we've got so many games to cover and so many stories to cover, much like we did last week, we'll try to keep it as rapid paced as we can because we want to get in as much as we can. We will get to the Hot Haney 5. We will get to some other major storylines, another episode of Under the Radar. A little bit of Don't Sleep On, and yes, we'll be back with some picks to wrap things up with the involving the future games this weekend. Gentlemen, without further ado, how's everybody? How was the weekend? JC, I saw you. If I was a little bit tired, I apologize. I called the Oklahoma game on Saturday, went from Norman to Wichita, caught a flight from Wichita to Chicago, called the Bears 49er quagmire game. Most of you have probably seen the players using the field as a slip and slide at Soldier Field. And then you and I had a chance to grab dinner. So I feel like I know how you're doing. You were doing quite well, looking good, feeling good. You got a shaved head now. That's the only thing that's different. Michael Haney also a shaved head. So I guess I'm breaking routine here by keeping some hair.
Well, I mean, do we need to make some kind of bet so you can join the group? Or
here's the thing. I am envious of you guys in that waking up with like a shaved head is the best thing in the world. And I've done it once before. Now with TV, it might be a little hard to do, but in the summertime, when I don't have as many obligations, I'm more than happy to do that. So we'll make a bet that I know I'm going to lose, and I will go El Baldo for a few weeks.
All right, I can understand that.
Yeah.
You got a long way to go until your Uncle Vern.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, yes, indeed. Michael's given us kind of a sneak preview of the Hot Haney 5. So I don't want to delve too much into the major storylines, but there are a bunch of them, JC. There's the Scott Frost thing is going to be number one. We're going to get into that. The A&M thing with Jimbo, we're going to get into that. I look around at what happened, and again, it's what we love about college football. It's what we're going to love even more pretty soon. Because, for example, and when I say pretty soon, I mean when we get the 12-team playoff. And what I mean by that is, for example, Appalachian State defeating Texas A&M. The story has been, I mean, I've heard 100 shows since the game, and everything is what this means for A&M, what this means for Jimbo. How could A&M lose this game at home? Is Jimbo worth the money that they're paying him? Oh, by the way, Appalachian State, great story, right? In a few years from now, a program like Appalachian State actually has a legitimate shot when they come off big wins like this, and maybe they have a dominating year in the Sun Belt, and we're going to give the Sun Belt a lot of love today. The Fun Belt deserves it. But they could actually be a legitimate playoff contender. And who doesn't like that story? I mean, I think that's good for the sport. I maintain that this format that now has 12 and only 6 conference champions guaranteed, or only 6 guaranteed, and then only one from each. No league can have more than one automatic bye week, right? So that when you have those top 4 bye teams, it's not going to be just chock full of SEC Big Ten. I maintain that it makes so many more games and stories relevant. That's not me being all Mr. Inclusive and let's just have a bunch of mediocre. No, I think the playoff is a perfect setup, but but I am amazed at how many people don't know much about Appalachian State. Like, bless the hearts of the Yell Night. You guys know what Yell Night is? You ever been?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you can't be a college football fan if
I've
you don't know
never.
what it is,
Well,
right?
well, I've
I've never
experienced
been.
it. Now, I covered it. The second year that they were in the league, I get a phone call from my bosses at ESPN and say, Mike, we got something different for you this week. It does not involve broadcasting a game. It involves you covering Yell Night the night before A&M hosted Alabama. This was the year after Johnny Manziel had already beaten Alabama and won the Heisman Trophy. So needless to say, Yell Night was pretty lit that night. And I had no idea what I'm getting into. I'm like, we're covering a pep rally? Really? And I'd heard of Yell Night, like you guys have heard of Yell Night, but we televised it. And we're sitting there in two movie director chairs at midfield and watching this. I'm like, this is unbelievable. But Yell Night got a little bit sideways when they just started. It became viral. Just started taking pot shots at Appalachian State and called them a bunch of hillbillies and this, that, and the other. And they've since taken it down. They realized it was a mistake. And look, college kids are going to say dumb things and do dumb things. We know all this. But Appalachian State's won 62 games over the last 6 years. Like they were a 1AA power, and then people wondered, well, how would they do it the next one? Well, they've done just fine. They've done just fine. So we shouldn't be that shocked at some of these Sun Belt programs that are pulling off wins. The other thing we shouldn't be shocked about, Michael, what was your question about new head coaches you had a week or two ago?
Who would be? Let's see. How did I phrase it? Who would be this year's say Brian Harsin or Steve Sarkisian coaches that walked into a situation where there were some expectations and they sort of fell flat on their face in year one?
And who did I say?
Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame.
And what happened to Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame?
He just got beat by the Marshall Thundering Herd.
Right.
Congrats, Mike.
Well, look, I'm not pulling against Marcus Freeman or even Notre Dame, although the arrogance of Notre Dame for me gets a little bit tiresome. But I'm not one of these people that feels so polarized that I have to either love or hate Notre Dame. No, I'm right on the fence. I don't love or hate Notre Dame, to be honest with you. But that hire, which was widely celebrated as a brilliant hire, certainly left a little bit to be desired when you're Notre Dame and you can get a lot of premier established coaches and you just hire within, a la Bob Davie, a defensive coordinator that has not been around the block too much. So he's lost his first couple of games now. And if you go back to the bowl game last year, he's 0-3. Maybe he turns it around, maybe he doesn't. But how many people even know what conference Marshall is in?
I I didn't know that. I knew they had moved to the Sun Belt only because they got out of Conference USA early and
Right.
sued to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, there was a complete poor Conference USA. This was once like a pretty damn good league.
Mm-hmm.
Then they lose everybody to the American, and now they've lost everybody to the Sun Belt. Like there's nothing left. I don't know, what is it, New Mexico State and the college from Necessary Roughness in the program. Like I don't know who's left in that league anymore. I guess it's still an actual league, but if you look at the Sun Belt, you look at Georgia Southern, you look at App State, you look at Old Dominion, who was the story a week ago or 2 weeks ago, whenever it was, beating Virginia Tech. And you look at Marshall, like Marshall's got a great tradition, a prideful tradition. I've been there for games. They live for college football. They will do anything they can within the rules to get good. And they got a bunch of guys in the transfer portal. So anyway, I that to me, and we'll get more into this, was a major storyline as well, was the Sun Belt and the fact that as much as the top is predictable in college football, the middle, I think, is actually expanded. I think there's more room for teams and upsets. Now, all that being said, the biggest game of the day that I'll admit I didn't think would be close was Alabama, Texas. And I'm watching that, guys, and I'm thinking, how in the world is Alabama struggling against this Texas defense? I just don't get it. I just don't get it. Texas hasn't played defense in years. How many people could name 2 people on that defense? Like, what? It just didn't make any sense. But it was a problem. Now, eventually, the Heisman Trophy winner on a key drive, you knew what was going to happen. I mean, Tom Brady-esque, just dissecting on that final drive. But what do we take out of that? What do we make out of that? Because think about this. Alabama barely won that game. Clemson didn't look good against Georgia Tech. Ohio State hasn't looked that good so far in action. Who am I missing? I mean, we haven't had dominating performances by the so-called dominating teams.
Well, Georgia, there's a reason they went to number 1 this week, because
Right.
they were dominant in that first game, and then had, beat Sanford like a drum, and then sat everybody the second half. But yeah, it's true. Alabama, I was very disappointed, because I thought this was one of those games Bama would come in and just roll. And they obviously didn't, and almost lost. And if Quinn Ewers had not been knocked out of the football game, they may have very well done it, because that kid's got an it factor about him.
Mm-hmm.
But 2 things on this. Number 1, this is not the first time in the last couple of years this has happened to Alabama. It happened at Auburn last year. That Auburn defense, while good, gave up what? 43 unanswered against Mississippi State a couple weeks before.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't exactly the impenetrable wall, right? And Bama went into there to a hostile environment and almost lost. Had it not been for Bryce Young's heroics, and this game kind of played out the same way. What this shows me, Mike, is that Texas's problem is not that they don't have players. Texas's problem is they don't consistently get up and play ball. This shows you how capable that team and that program has been for years. And it's going to be interesting to see how they do the rest of the way. Does this kind of inspire them to say, hey, well, look, we have a chance to be really, really good and win the Big 12 and maybe get another shot at Bama later this year? Or do they flounder around and don't show up half the time and, wine and cheese, whatever you want to call it? And that, hey, the Alabama thing was a nice memory, but, you lost, and you've lost about 4 or 5 more. That's the key. And that's going to be the key for Texas getting into the SEC in a couple of years, because you have to bring it just about every week. I mean, yeah, instead of, you don't get a Kansas, although Kansas beat them last year and beat West Virginia. But you don't get a breather. You're going to Ole Miss. You're playing Arkansas. You're playing Mississippi State and what they bring. You're playing LSU. You're playing Oklahoma and A&M still. And so that's going to be the key for Texas, is to kind of realize, hey, look, when we play, we have enough players to play with anybody in the country. We just don't always do it. And so I think that's the lesson for them. If I'm Bama, I'm not panicking right now, because, hey, you've been there before. And the week after you struggled to beat Auburn on the road, you go to Atlanta and you're the only team that beat Georgia, and you scored 41 points doing it. So, sometimes Nick Saban, when he has a game like this, that's when he's at his most dangerous. So I wasn't as concerned about Bama. The result surprised the crap out of me, but I wasn't as concerned about Bama as maybe some people were.
Yeah, I would have to chalk it up to one of those X factor situations. You're right. If the quarterback isn't injured for Texas, JC, it's probably a different story. But even then, for Alabama, they've lost games before, and they're still right there at the end of the year in the conversation, or just outright winning the title. But to me, this was early kickoff on the road at Texas, 2 traditional teams. The fan base was behind them. I just think it was one of those situations where Alabama walked into a hornet's nest, and while they were lucky to get out alive, I don't know that this is the Texas that we're going to see week in and week out for the rest of the season. I think that was number 1 team in our home, early kickoff. Let's get them early and see what happens.
And now I'll remind everyone too, Georgia in 2017 played for the national title, went to Notre Dame, won by the exact same score in week 2, 20-19. And still won the SEC and all that. Now, Jake Fromm was starting for them that game as a true freshman, et cetera, et cetera. The circumstances were different, but, teams can escape some of these, early season games on the road and still have a good go of things. I would be very concerned, though, if I were Alabama, about facing Arkansas 2 weeks from Saturday. That Arkansas is very impressive.
They're very impressive. I still think Mississippi State, that's my team that finished second in the West. I think they're very impressive. They just haven't had that spotlight game yet. They go on the road and they beat Arizona. Yeah, some people might say, well, so what? But again, they go on the road, which very few SEC teams do, to the Pac-12 territory and win a game that could be losable. So Will Rogers just continues to light it up game after game after game, and nobody talks about him. Talk about being an under the radar guy. Um, so yeah, I don't think it's incomprehensible that Alabama or Georgia could lose a game. I just don't see them losing more than one en route to meeting in Atlanta. And that's why I think it's an easy pick. By the way, I couldn't help think the SEC office watching that game. This is like the perfect scenario because you want Alabama to win because they're in the SEC and Texas is not. But you want Texas to show like they belong. And Texas gave a hell of a game. Crowd was unbelievable. From what I understand, for game day, they were packed from like 7 a.m. on. It was everything that you want to kind of make a statement like, yeah, we'll be ready for you, SEC. I will tell you this. As everybody's talking about goo goo gaga over Texas, this was my first time in Oklahoma in 10 years. I forgot just like how good Norman in Oklahoma is. Like it is every bit, and they've been a hell of a lot more successful than Texas. So while Texas gets all the limelight, Oklahoma's the program that's probably going to come in here and be much more of a factor right away. They've got the right coach. They continually get blue chip players all over the place. They own the state. They recruit nationally. They got 142 consecutive sellouts, which is the longest streak in the country. They've won more games than any team in college football since World War II. Like, that is a huge pickup. And the way the coverage has been is like, they got Texas, and Oklahoma too. Oklahoma could be much more of an impact and much more of a team that people don't want to play once they get in there. But either way, it's every time Texas and Oklahoma do things good, the SEC is smiling. I mean, that's a beautiful thing. And if you're the Big 12, it's like, yeah, we're about to lose you guys anyway. It's just kind of a weird, a weird vibe that's surrounding. And I still think that divorce is going to happen early. I think 2024, everything is going to be situated. They're going to be in the SEC. Where the playoff is going to come a year or two early, and 2024 is my utopia year in college football. Before we get into the hot Haney five, because I know he's got a little bit of SEC, but some other SEC spotlight. Congratulations to Tennessee going on to Pittsburgh and finally beating Pitt for the first time in that kind of odd rivalry. I guess you could call it the Johnny Majors Bowl of sorts. That's a big win for Hendon Hooker and Tennessee and Josh Heupel, and more of a statement that like they're on the right track. And the Florida Kentucky game, I got to say this: the hype, the absolute incredible overreaction to Anthony Richardson in week one was so over the top, and it got exposed in week two by Kentucky. First off, you had people like talking about Heisman Trophy. The Heisman Trophy odds went from, 100 to 1 to 18 to 1. Everybody was jumping that bandwagon. They're comparing him to Cam Newton. I kept telling you folks, he's not Cam Newton. He still hasn't thrown a touchdown pass this year. I mean, I've never seen a player so hyped that's thrown 0 touchdowns, 2 picks, and is completing 52% of his passes through 2 weeks. Like he's got a ways to go. And I've got enough good sources there that have told me like they are concerned about him being a good, accurate passer. And at some point in big games, if you don't have that, it's a problem. Will Levis outplayed him. And Kentucky just continues to be that team that nobody is overly high on. And you can't name any players on their team. I can just by virtue of the fact I've had a lot of Kentucky games the last couple of years. But they went into the swamp, and Mark Stoops just reminded everybody, yep, we're still here. We're still here. Enjoy your hype train. Enjoy your Tom Petty at the end of the third quarter. We just beat you in the swamp for the second time. And Kentucky has been the ultimate thorn in Florida's side. So while you're talking about catching up to Georgia, there's a lot of programs that are like this in the East. What do we got to do to catch Georgia? What do we got to do to catch? You might want to catch Kentucky first, because they keep spoiling the party for everybody else. So that was the other the other two games in the SEC that stood out.
Yeah, Kentucky, they just kind of bleed you to death, and they're going to play good defense. They're going to be sound fundamentally. They're going to execute their game plan. They're going to run the ball and try to stop the run. And I think, unfortunately for Billy Napier and the Gators, the secret's probably out. You know, you bottle Anthony Richardson up running the football, and look, this offense at Louisiana was the same thing. You know, if their quarterback wasn't running it, and they weren't able to get things going on the ground, you know, they were very pedestrian. Now, you know, in that league, it was a little bit different. They had more talent, you know, that kind of thing. But you know, they better fix that, because I don't think right now they can hang with Tennessee in a couple of weeks. Not with the way the Vols are playing on offense. Tennessee's got an opportunistic defense. I wouldn't call it one of the best in the league, but they got turnovers when they needed to get it, and saved the day up at Heinz Field. And I'll always call it Heinz Field, by the way. I've said that before, but you know, so that's
It'll always be the big ketchup bottle to me as well.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I can't even pronounce whatever it's called now. But I'll say this: I got to obviously watch South Carolina and Arkansas, and I'm telling you right now, Arkansas, and look, South Carolina probably did not play its best on defense, especially. But that offense they have right now with Raheem Sanders and with that KJ Jefferson, who just basically, if you haven't bottled up for a 3-yard gain, he's going to fall forward for 4 or 5. And then you get Kendall Briles in third and less than 5. It's brutally difficult to stop. I mean, because Briles runs all this eye candy and motions, and you know, okay, you want to stack the box, he's just going to throw it over the top of you like his dad. That's what I love about Kendall Briles. The Briles offense in general. I'm going to keep beating this drum, and they run a variation of it, Tennessee, variation at Ole Miss, variation at Arkansas. And it's really like watching 3 different styles of play, same offensive system. It's so versatile and so good. And KJ Jefferson is just a freak when it comes to running the football. He's got a good back. And their offensive line, I could care less like what star rating they were out of high school. That may be the best offensive line in the country. Those guys will battle you. They're all strong. They're all athletic. There's not a lot of big fat guys on the line. They were impressive. I think they've got a good scheme of things on defense. Drew Sanders, who came over from Alabama, is a
huge transfer portal guy for them. He's a stud.
Holy terror. He won the Walter Camp Defensive Player of the Week. I mean, he was just crazy, just kamikaze against the Gamecocks. Look out for the Hogs. I was talking to a friend of mine from another podcast today. He was on my Gamecock show. He says he thinks Arkansas is the top 5 team in the country. We'll see. But I was way more impressed with Arkansas than I was maybe disappointed in the Gamecocks.
Yeah, the only thing, I watched 3 quarters of that game, and I know they put some points on the board late. But I texted you because I'm watching in my hotel room in Norman, and I watched Spencer Rattler 3 times, had guys who beat their man downfield. And if you throw it on target, it's a big play, if not a touchdown. And 3 times he overthrew him before he threw an ill-advised interception. There's work to go. Like we've talked about, that's a huge pickup to get a 5-star guy with those kind of skills there. But there's a reason why he got benched at OU, and it's not all Caleb Williams. Like at times, Spencer Rattler, there's an accuracy. I keep going back to that word accuracy, and I know it's a boring word, and I know it doesn't make Sports Center, and people don't want to talk about that. They all want to talk about that. They love the word dynamic. Anybody that can run the ball is dynamic. He's dynamic. He's dynamic. Please, let's find another word for that. But give me a guy who puts the ball on target more than dynamic. Now, if you can have the best of both worlds, you have Josh Allen, you have Pat Mahomes. But if you have to pick one out of 2, I want a guy who can hit open receivers in stride. Because when you're playing a team like Arkansas that is salty on defense and well coached, you only have so many of those opportunities left. So I don't care if you finish with 370 yards passing. That's empty calories to me. When do you get those yards? Do you get them when the game is tight and it's on the line and you have those few open windows? Or do you just stockpile them late where it's not a huge factor in the game? So, those are some of the things. Again, not burying the kid. He still has a chance to be really, really good, but he's just not there yet. I didn't think it was a great game for him. It wasn't quite the mess that it was for Anthony Richardson at Florida, but it wasn't a great game for him. And if when you're one of those programs like we've talked about this so much in the SEC, there's going to be a lot of swing games for these middle teams. There's Bama and Georgia, and then at the bottom it's going to be Vandy and somebody else.
Missouri probably. Missouri was a dumpster fire.
Yeah. I mean, Missouri is but then you look at those 10 teams in the middle, and you're going to have a ton of close games and a ton of swing games. And I'm telling you right now, the difference is going to be quarterbacks who are able to make plays and quarterbacks who don't make plays in those key moments. All right, let's get to that Hot Haney 5. Those are some of the other things that we wanted to get to. Michael Haney, without further ado, the world has been waiting for this for 7 long days. People talk about it. They set their watch to it. The stock market, it ebbs and flows based on the morale of the Hot Haney 5. People feel good or are morbidly depressed based on the Hot Haney 5. So you got a lot of pressure on you as you deliver these 5 hot topics in college football.
All right, Mike. Well, let's kick it off with number 1. There's a lot of morbidly depressed people in Lincoln, Nebraska, because Scott Frost has been fired. As you stated at the outset here, with the first major domino to fall in the college football world. You talked about all these swing games and close games for middle tier SEC teams. Well, Scott Frost, 5-22 in one-score games during his tenure in Lincoln. He was 16-31 overall, so 22 of the 31 losses were by one score. Just agonizingly brutal ways to lose games, but when you lose that many, ultimately it comes back to you and the way that you're doing things as a head coach. So Trev Alberts goes ahead and makes the decision to move on from Scott Frost. Coincidentally enough, the loss came to Georgia Southern, who was coached by none other than Clay Helton, who was fired almost a year ago to the day at Southern Cal. So here we see 2 blue blood programs within the span of a season fire their coaches within the first few weeks of the year. Guys, all of the things that we could look at in terms of Nebraska and where they're going to go moving forward. But I have a larger question in terms of where college football is headed. Do you think now, based on what USC did last year with Helton, what we're seeing now at Nebraska, with all of the influx of money coming through with players getting NIL benefits and different things of that nature moving forward, the playoff expanding, are we going to start seeing more of college football, which we already know is a business, be run more like a business, like some of these professional leagues where, you know, after a certain number of weeks, if you're in the NBA or the NHL or whatever, if you haven't hit a certain benchmark, you're gone. Is college football going to start getting to that point, or is this just more of a flash in the pan situational deal with these schools?
No, I think we're already there is a short answer to your question. And you know, God help Brian Harsin if they get to a bad start in Auburn. I don't think they'd wait till the end of the year on the Plains either. Think about this. They could have waited a couple more weeks. Nebraska could have and saved $7.5 million in terms of what they were paying for the buyout.
That's done.
Yeah, because big time programs, JC, you and I talked about this in the discussion about Will Muschamp. And big time programs don't sit there and worry about how much they pay on a buyout. Like when it's time, it's time. Auburn spent $24 million to get rid of Gus Malzahn. Ed Orgeron has been laughing and yucking it up about the $17.5 million that LSU paid for him to exit. You don't sit there with the money that's coming in through the cash register of big time programs in the SEC and the Big Ten in particular. You don't sit there and worry about, well, if we wait another month and a half, we can save 7.5. No, that's a rounding error, on the budgets for these programs right now. Look, the Scott Frost thing, what can be said that hasn't been said? It's I like almost everybody thought this was a can't lose hire. Scott Frost did a very good work at UCF and then turns down the Florida job and then goes to his alma mater. And you're thinking, if this guy can't do it, no one can in Lincoln. Well, it'd be one thing if he just got blown. Like you mentioned I think you mentioned the overall record. It's awful. It'd be one thing if you were just getting blown out. Like there was a time where you just think a certain, like, I think of certain coaches that were just at wit's end and they weren't even being competitive. The problem with Scott Frost teams is that they were being competitive, but to go 5-22 in one score games is almost impossible. Like, I just saw a Tim Donaghy Netflix special about referees in the NBA. By the way, I recommend it highly. Basically influencing games against the spread. And to go 5-22 in a one, if you didn't know any better, and this is not the case, let me just stress in bold letters and underline it. This is not what happened. But if you didn't know any better, you'd say, this is almost like somebody's on the take and making sure Vinny and them get what they want and take 20, what was it, 17 out of the 22 one-score games. You got to work hard. Or no, 22 out of the 27. You got to work hard to lose those games at that frequency. It's almost impossible to do that. So they're good enough talent-wise to compete. It's not like they don't have anybody, but they continually found games to lose, close games, and that is 100% coaching. I'm the first one to say it's about the Jimmies and the Joes, but when you're good enough to continually stay close, but bad enough on the sideline to continually find ways to lose, highlighted, of course, by the onside kick in Dublin, but there's so many more examples of it. That says to me that Nebraska might not be as far off as we think. Yeah, there's culture that needs to be fixed. Yeah, there's something that's clearly off compared to what it was. By the way, it wasn't like people were driving a Studebaker the last time Nebraska was good, right? It wasn't like we were listening to 8 tracks the last time Nebraska was good. The CD was prominent. We were driving really fast fuel injection cars in the 90s when they won 3 out of 4 national titles. This fall from grace is legendary. It's absolutely legendary to go from not just a really good year, but a dynasty of sorts to where they are now. Well, I'm just gonna say one last thing on it. They are not getting Mark Stoops. If I hear this one more time, Mark Stoops is not leaving Kentucky for Nebraska. I can give you 1,000 reasons why that'll never happen. Stop wasting your time on that rumor. Way too intelligent people that cover this sport for a living are reporting that as a prominent possibility. It's simply not. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I just want to say, you mentioned Appalachian State earlier, and then obviously what they did with A&M this week. Anybody that's been watching college football for a long time has seen the growth and the build of what Appalachian State is from, the flashbulb win with Michigan. But even with different coaching changes, Appalachian State has an identity. Nebraska had an identity until what you just mentioned. This fall from grace, they decided to change what they were and try to have a spread offense and try to grow within in the game. And that's just not it. They've changed conferences. Mm-hmm. We see a school that's building itself at a program that's building itself with Appalachian State. How in the hell does Nebraska not understand that they needed to always just be who they were, and we wouldn't be talking about this right now?
I think the conference change killed them. I don't think they have much in common with, okay, so they border Iowa, and that's a big game at the end of the year. They used to play Minnesota back when they're in the Big 8. That's a bit, but that's not that they don't get up for them like they do for Oklahoma and Texas and Missouri and even the Kansas schools and Iowa State and those guys. I mean, they're kind of a fish out of water, and they have a habit of firing guys that win 8 or 9 games, like Frank Solich and Bo Pelini. Sometimes that comes back to bite you. I'm shocked. I'm just as shocked as you guys are that the Frost hire didn't work out. I understand leaving your identity a little bit because I felt like Scott Frost will be able to recruit better out there in terms of speed. And if you look at that division, a loaded with speed Nebraska spread offense with a good quarterback, I'm not convinced they ever had one, against the ground and pound in that division. It's scary. I mean, I was like, oh my God, here we go. Wisconsin better look out, but they never even came close. They got worse. I think what Nebraska needs to do is forget the past. Admit right now you're not getting the players you used to get. You'll probably never get the players you used to get unless you start winning big again. And I'd go with a guy that does more with less. And Frost really at UCF wasn't that guy. I think at UCF, they're always going to have a certain amount of skill talent. The state of Florida, if you look at Trace, kind of the recruiting before he built his team there were a lot of guys Florida and Florida State should have offered, Miami should have offered that didn't, that ended up at UCF that were really, really good. I think that, yes, Mark Stoops is the ultimate more with less guy. If that is not a possibility, I think you got to look at Matt Campbell from Iowa State. If he would jump, that's the type of guy. PJ Fleck at Minnesota, that's the type of guy. The problem is, whereas 10 years ago, even 12 years ago, a lot of those guys would jump at the chance to go to Nebraska, right? It's Nebraska, for God's sake. Well, they've fallen so far, and it's proven to be such a difficult job, and the expectations don't match with what they actually can accomplish. And they got great fans, and they're patient or whatever, but obviously 16-31 is not up to standard. Losing to Georgia Southern is not up to standard. It's a place that I think still has a chance, but that's fading quickly. You almost, Jamie Chadwell from Coastal Carolina has been mentioned for that job. There's a long list of guys. That would be good. Jamie runs like a dynamic, tough to stop offense. He knows how to go find players to fit it, that type of thing. Because you have to do something. I mean, you can't just sit there and keep, hiring this guy, that guy, or whatever, and hoping it'll work because you're Nebraska. You got to say, okay, what's the problem? The problem is recruiting. Because you haven't recruited speed and you don't have a lot of skill and you haven't recruited quarterbacks. Okay, well, who can come in here and find guys that can come in and play to where we can compete, not in the league as a whole right now, but in this division? Because, man, Southern Cal and UCLA are about to join up. Man, they're going to be left in the dust. Nebraska it'll be one of the biggest downfalls in the history of this sport, and it's sad. But I think they need to not go with the no-brainer guy. They need to go find a guy, kind of like the guy that coaches at K-State or the guy that Kansas has right now. Those types of guys that can kind of manufacture wins, because that's unfortunately the shape that their program's in right now.
Michael, to your point, go back to what. Look, if they were going to do that, you go after Troy Calhoun, who runs the option at Air Force, and don't look now, but Air Force is relevant again. He's doing a terrific job. He's a good coach. I don't think you can win big time. Paul Johnson tried it at Georgia Tech. I realize Nebraska's got more going for it than Georgia Tech, but still, what happens when you run that kind of offense and you lose, people will continually just say it's the offense. It's the offense. You can't recruit players that want to play in the NFL in an NFL type offense. So the genie's out of the bottle, unfortunately, for going to the Big Ten. I think, to JC's point, that was an awful, awful move. That's not a knock on the Big Ten. It's not a fit. It's just not a fit. If you could get a mulligan on that, I'm sure they'd gladly give up some of the revenues and go back to the Big 12, where they were much more successful and seemed to be a better fit. But that's done. You can't undo it, I don't think. And so now I think, JC, you hit on the key names that I would look at. I mean, I'd offer Matt Campbell more money. What do you call it? Caged animal syndrome, JC, on the hires?
Yeah, caged animal.
I'd be a caged animal AD and offer Matt Campbell so much stinking money that he could not possibly say no, even though he gets paid a lot of money in Ames and he's very happy in Ames. And if anything, Matt Campbell could still take an NFL job. But I would at least give my all to try to make that happen. You mentioned Leopold at Kansas. He's done a terrific job already, had great success at the 1AA level. I just don't know. I don't know if Nebraska, forget about being like national title or even playoff good. Like, when is Nebraska going to be relevant again, even if you get this hire right? I don't know, but that's up to Trev Alberts to figure it out.
All right, question number 2, and another hire that I think a lot of people felt was right. You talk about big time programs making moves. You just go get it when you want to get it. And Texas A&M, they pried Jimbo Fisher away from Florida State with a ton of money. However, guys, I'm going to read a set of numbers for you here. Through their first 50 games, Kevin Sumlin and Jimbo Fisher. Are you ready for this?
Yeah.
Kevin Sumlin, 36-14. Jimbo, 35-15. Against the top 25, Sumlin, 9-11. Jimbo, 7-10. Road games, Sumlin, 12-5. Fisher, 7-9. And upsets as the Caesar Sportsbook favorite, Sumlin was upset 4 times as head coach, and now Jimbo Fisher, after the App State embarrassment, 6. So for a guy who was making a lot of money and supposedly a cute quarterback guru and offensive guy, got a ton of talent at Texas A&M. There's no doubt about that. But guys, what's going on with Jimbo Fisher and not being able to find a consistent quarterback there in College Station?
All right, I'll keep it quick because I know we went long in the last one. To be fair, he did not inherit a Heisman Trophy game-changing quarterback like Johnny Manziel did. Kevin Sumlin had Johnny Manziel for 2 years, and that's where most of those wins came from. When Manziel moved on to the NFL, that was the end of Kevin Sumlin as having any success in College Station. B, the quarterback guru, which is usually, when you think about it, that's like the ultimate hex. It's like calling a coach a genius. When you start using terms like that, you're basically setting them up to fail. I don't think Jimbo Fisher is a quarterback guru. I think he's had some success, and that's where he makes his bones, is on offensive strategy and working with quarterbacks. But when you have Jameis Winston, that's one thing. When you have the stable that he's had here, that's another. C, and I said this at the beginning of the year, and I'm still amazed that the move hasn't been made. More often than not, when there's a quarterback controversy or battle, what I notice coaches are doing, guys, is they just take the better athlete because they feel like if it's close, let's just take the guy who runs better. Haynes King is a freakish athlete who runs extremely well. He's fast. He's much faster than Max Johnson. He's not a better quarterback. I think Max Johnson should be the guy, and I predict he will be the guy. I think if they had that to do over, they would have started Max Johnson, who's already proven he can play quarterback pretty well at this level, which is what he did at LSU last year.
Yeah, and Max isn't slow either. He's not as good of a runner as Haynes, but he dart out there and get some yards at LSU. I was surprised he didn't win the job either, Mike. And I think that just reading stuff today, I think it's probably coming because they have to. They got Miami this weekend, nationally televised primetime game, and then it doesn't get any easier. Got Arkansas after that. They could start 1-5. 1-5. I don't think they will, but they could actually realistically start 1-5, and that would they have an open date. So I don't know. Stranger things have happened. I don't know that the Aggies are willing to eat that contract right now, but shoot.
No,
a 1-5 start would be just the wheels would be coming.
Well, God, yeah. I mean, but I should have made that D. I don't think Jimbo, I hear the talk. He's not on the hot seat. They're not going to fire him. They can't, not because of the money. They just can't hit the reset button that quickly and give up on a guy that clearly there are very powerful people that wanted that man from the start and then made sure when there was the hint, so much as a hint that he might leave for LSU, they G'd him up a second time. Like there's no way that they're going to dispose of him that early. Now, we'll see how this season turns out. We'll see how there are a lot of games to be played, as we all know. But 2023 will definitely be a pressure-packed year for Jimbo Fisher because at that point, I think all bets are off. I think enough time has passed. Look, he didn't inherit a great situation from Kevin Sumlin, but by the same token, it's not that you thought you'd be playing for national titles right now, but you certainly thought you'd see some better results and better things on the offensive side of the ball.
All right, guys, moving along to the Aggies' rival in Texas. Let's go back to that conversation we were having at the outset of the show. Again, Texas, they took it as a moral victory. You hear Sarkisian after the game saying that, he's proud of his players. He didn't look at it so much as a loss, but showing that they could compete with the number one team in the country. It seems a lot of the at least media votes took that to heart. as well. I swore that I personally would never get worked up over in-season polls, at least until we get to the college football playoff polls, which is the one that ultimately matters in the end anyway. But Texas finds themselves ranked number 25 after losing to number 1 Alabama. I'm putting this in here because I have a personal problem with that. I want to see what you guys feel about the Longhorns seemingly getting rewarded with a media vote to be put into the top 25 after a loss at home.
Well, number one, you should never get stressed over a media poll, Michael. It's bad for your complexion. And
I understand.
I know, as a guy who has to perform on stage and all those young ladies who love their country music, and they want you clean faced and unstressed and looking at your very best. So that's the most important thing. The most important takeaway that I give to your answer for number 3. The other thing is I don't really have because the polls are so inconsequential. It doesn't bother me. I mean, basically what they're saying is we're going to reward you, Texas, for scheduling a difficult game against Alabama and giving a valiant effort. If I went, and I don't even look at the polls anymore. If I went and looked at 20 through 25, could I find, could I find teams that I think Texas can beat ahead of them? Yeah, probably. So we can't say it's all merit based. At this point, we've only played 2-3 games. It's just a beauty contest, and they won some beauty vote. They looked pretty good in a bikini in that game, even though they didn't win it.
I tend to agree. I'm kind of in the middle. I think generally these days, sometimes the media that votes for these things, they get a little lazy, and they've sort of, instead of looking at reality, I think sometimes they reward hype. I don't understand dropping Alabama and then you're going to put Texas in the top 25. To me, that doesn't make any logical sense, but not much does. I mean, the same group had A&M 6th.
That's right.
I mean,
that's right. They still. I almost forgot it. That's hard to even.
They're still ranked too. Aggies are 24th.
24th. So now you're forcing me to look at this thing. Pitt dropped 6 spots to 23rd. Penn State 22. They take on Auburn. So there's Texas at 21. I mean, Oregon's 25. Could Texas beat Oregon? Sure. Especially if they had a healthy Ewers.
Mm-hmm.
Could they beat Wake? I'm a big Sam Hartman Wake Forest guy, but they could beat Wake. They could beat Florida. I don't have a big problem with it.
All right. Well, there we go. I guess I'll just hold on to that one myself.
You need to let go. Let go, Michael.
You keep that anger to yourself, Mike. Just don't take it out on innocent pedestrians.
I will not. I will not. All right. Well, that's good. Well, maybe you guys can talk me off the ledge a little bit later on with that. Let's move on to number 4. And coming up this week, let's look ahead. We've got Bobby Petrino, who's been doing a great job at Missouri State at a lower level. No one ever questioned Bobby Petrino's coaching ability. It was all the other stuff that came along with it. But he heads back to Arkansas. JC had some very nice things to say about the Hogs earlier after their game with South Carolina. But Bobby Petrino heading back to the sidelines to face the Hogs here. I just have an overall question here. What does this remind you, or what does this make you think of in terms of maybe some of the most awkward reunions that we've seen from head coaches or people going back to particular places after it didn't end necessarily well?
Well, Hugh Freeze went back to Ole Miss last year, didn't he?
Yeah.
That's a little. I mean, I still have a bumper sticker when all that was going down and he hadn't quite been fired yet, and it said, "We stand by Hugh Freeze." They were handing him out. I was getting ready to broadcast a game. Lane Kiffin has kind of let people forget about that because Lane's already had some success. But for a few years there were still a lot of Ole Miss people that were like, did we really have to fire the guy? Could we just get our point across? Maybe, take away the cell phone, take away the Netflix, you're kind of like you're grounded for a few months, but that was awkward. I would say, Spurrier coming back to the Swamp as a South Carolina coach. I remember broadcasting that game on on a tape delayed, and that was just a bizarre feeling all around. And it's just weird. Like eventually people got used to it, and Steve now is prominently loved, I think, by both fan bases, and he has a great appreciation for his time at both schools. But that first year back in the swamp, that was a weird vibe. Those are two that stand out off the bat to me, JC.
You talked about Lane Kiffin, him going back to Knoxville last year.
Yeah,
and then they threw everything on the field. I mean, because look, Spurrier left and went to the NFL, came back. It was still awkward. I remember that game. The Gamecocks had a field goal blocked and an extra point blocked at the end. Otherwise, they would have beaten the national champs. That would have caused some probably angst and consternation on the part of Gator Nation. But that Lane Kiffin thing, they've been waiting on him, because he's never really had a chance to come back and coach at Tennessee. And so
lined up all the mustard bottles.
Yeah, and he left in the middle of the night. I mean, that was sort of bad.
He left after 1 year, goes 7-6, and leaves them in the fold, and they didn't recover from that for about 10 years. So yeah, I understand that bitterness. By the way, did you guys see the dunk tank? I forget where this was, but they set up a dunk tank where you could throw mustard bottles, and if you hit the target, then Lane falls down or a fake Lane falls down in the water. But
nothing funnier than a dunk tank, man. Nothing.
Gotta love a good dunk tank.
Yeah, I love it. Orgeron maybe going back to Ole Miss. In some welcome back to Ole Miss. I'm trying to think of some others. Probably, it's probably Mike Leach. Has never gotten a chance to play Texas Tech. I would imagine if he went back and coached in Lubbock, and with I think there's still a lawsuit that he's filed there. I mean, that would be good. And Texas Tech's actually on Mississippi State's schedule here in a couple of years. So we'll see if that lasts and that happens. There's going to be an awkward moment when Will Muschamp is on the sidelines at Georgia this weekend, coming back to South Carolina. There's a lot of Gamecock fans that don't really have a lot of appreciation for Will Muschamp, and I think it's overblown. I think that was, Muschamp didn't leave in the middle of the night like Kiffin, and he always worked hard. It was just kind of a business thing. Didn't work out. There's no need to hate on the guy, but that could get awkward this weekend. But that Bobby Petrino thing, man, that's going to be something else. I mean, they're going to get tattooed. Don't get me wrong, Missouri State, but that it'll be interesting to see how the Hog fans sort of react, because that was just a bad situation. Arkansas was rolling, and then they immediately go into the wilderness with John L. Smith, Brett Bielema, Chad Morris, and now they're back out with Sam Pittman. But that Petrino, they would have kept right on going had Petrino not gotten busted on a motorcycle with a neck brace.
The infamous neck brace press conference.
The neck brace press conference was epic, and it was just like,
it is amazing, because I talked to people here in Atlanta who covered the Falcons when he was the coach here, and it's the same thing. Like, he was a grade A-hole, and how somebody can be so good at what they do, and all you have to be is a semi-nice person, and you can overcome a lot of that other stuff. But he was universally hated by people around him, is what I found out. Everywhere. It doesn't matter where we're talking. Arkansas, Louisville, the Falcons. The man just rubs everybody the wrong way, and you just wonder how. I guess we all have come across somebody like that, right?
Sure.
There's people in our business. There's people you just know randomly. There's the guy you play pickup basketball with that never. I mean, there's just always that one person like, good God, did they ever just look in the mirror and say, why am I such an a-hole? Why can't I just be a decent person? And unfortunately, that's the case for Petrino, because he is a brilliant coach, and Hugh Freeze is a good coach. Now, Hugh's not an a-hole. He just had screw up after screw up.
Some demons. Yeah, he's actually a good guy. I think Hugh is. But it's funny because, think about this. Auburn tried to hire Bobby Petrino in the middle of the night, and then they got busted up somehow, and they were just. I mean, think about that, dude. God almighty, Auburn. Wow.
All right. Yeah, I love that trip down memory lane, man. The Petrino stuff, when that news broke, I remember being on the air but back in the old radio days back in South Carolina. And that was, man, what a humdinger of a story. That
Mhm.
Oh,
was
that
like, I'm
was
sorry, wait, what? I'm sorry, what?
yeah,
What?
very
Yeah.
salacious details there.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on to the final topic here of the Hot Haney Five. We go on back to the college football playoff. The commissioners met last Thursday in Dallas, and there was a little bit of an interesting thing. I want to get you guys' thoughts on this particular one. Conference USA Commissioner Judy McLeod and we had American Athletic Conference Commissioner Mike Oresco both say afterwards in their comments that they're going to start vowing that we get rid of the phrase the group of five. McLeod said, quote, the group of five label needs to go away. Oresco saying, quote, let's call it FBS. That's what we wanted to do all along. Not every FBS conference is created equal. We know this, but the point is, why not have a hierarchy at the end that you can earn? Now, at least you have some access. End quote from Mike Oresco. Guys, your feelings as we progress with the playoff going to 12 teams, the thoughts that we, I guess, stop having that dividing line between Power Five and Group of Five.
Mine's quick. I'll say something quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
McLeod needs to just shut up. Okay, because Conference USA, they're. You remember in Top Gun when the first one, when he looks at Goose and it's like, you a-hole are lucky to be here. You remember that?
Oh yeah.
The bald headed, I don't remember the colonel's name or the colonel's name, but
Damn it, Maverick.
She's lucky to be there. I mean, or they're lucky to be there. It's not her, it's the conference. I was like, maybe that's not the best. I mean, maybe you should roll the Sun Belt commish out. And then Oresco's got a point. I mean, I see it because now it's just going to be one big happy playoff, right? But the bottom line is Mike, you've called games at those schools and Power Five schools. I mean, they're night and day, buddy. I mean, you were Norman this past weekend. I remember one time you went to Las Cruces, New Mexico.
That's right. Yeah.
There's a difference.
There's a slight difference. Yeah. There's a slight difference between Norman and Las Cruces. There's a slight difference between Austin, Texas and Murfreesboro. There's a slight difference between Tuscaloosa and Ruston, Louisiana. I've been to all of these places to call games, and I can tell you there's a major difference between Group 5 and Power 5. And Mike Oresco, it should be noted, who I'm impressed with when I hear him interviewed, and he's on there a lot, is not afraid to tell people for years. He said, it's the Power 6, not the Power 5, and we are the number 6. So he loved that phrase, trying to incorporate the American. Now the American got completely poached and by the Big 12 and the Sun Belt. And so the American is not going to be the American as we knew it. And Conference USA, I mean, I don't know who's going to be left because they're going to lose FAU. They're going to lose Charlotte. They're going to lose UAB. They're going to lose a lot. I don't know who's left. So this is a conference that, again, had opportunities to just continue TV deals with the likes of ESPN and Fox and decided, you know what, we're going to be the smartest person in the room. We're going to go and stream our games on outlets that nobody's ever heard of. So, yeah, as far as the American is concerned, and I think the American's done valiant work. It's not Mike Oresco's fault that he's about to lose half his league. But, again, they wanted to be called the Power 6. Now that they're about to be completely savaged by bigger leagues, then it's like, well, let's get rid of all these nicknames and identities. We're all just one big happy family. I don't care what you call it. The fact of the matter is, those 5 leagues, like you said, JC, compared to what the other 5 have to deal with, it's night and day. And so, if you're a head coach in those leagues, I don't think they mind the Group 5 designation because it reminds everybody, hey, I have to beat teams with much less resources than the other guys. You should know this. I want you to know, what's the famous Bill Parcells quote? If you're going to ask me to cook the meal, then let me buy the groceries. Well, they don't get to buy the groceries. They are handed a gift card to cash and carry while the Power 5 coaches go into Whole Foods with 10 times the amount to spend. So Well, no matter what you call it, there's no denying the fact that there's a line in the sand between the haves and the, I don't want to say have nots, but they have a whole lot less.
Absolutely. That's absolutely true. And hey, look, they're going to get their shot, so we'll see what happens here pretty soon.
And we're about to praise the Sun Belt. So this is not a anti-Group 5 thing at all. I love Group 5 football. I love I just said at the top of the show, I think the playoff is a terrific thing in part because it keeps the Group 5 alive. If you had changed the stipulations of the framework of the playoff, the Group 5 would be forever screwed. It would be like being relegated in soccer. And don't get me started on relegation guy doing a 10-minute segment on sports talk radio saying that's what we need in college football. It's never going to happen. Don't waste the people's lives having to hear that for 10 minutes. Michael Haney, number 5.
That was number 5, Mike.
That was 5.
That was 5. So now
let's move on.
Hey, you can praise the Sun Belt all you want right now.
All right, let's do that. Well, I'm going to do a little under the radar, and that's going to be capped off by the Sun Belt. So I want to say, first off, Chase Bryce. Remember we gave him love last week on Under the Radar. Yeah, he came through again. This time with a win. How about Duke football? They're 2-0. They beat Northwestern. Nobody expected that to happen. You know who their head coach is? Bueller.
Mike Elko.
Mike Elko from
Texas A&M.
Yeah, offense wasn't the only problem on Saturday for Texas A&M. Maybe they miss Mike Elko a little bit. Maybe Mike Elko, that's a heck of a hire for Duke football. A lot of people were surprised he took that job considering where Duke was. He's already got a big win. Congratulations to Lance Leipold. Kansas football was at the point where they were an underdog to some FCS teams.
Yeah.
Like they were, like you'd see Kansas taking on a power FCS school, and you'd be like, I'm taking the power FCS school. You kidding me? It's Kansas. They were that bad. They just won at West Virginia. Huge win for Kansas. Congratulations to Lance Leipold. Terrific hire. I will mention this. The Kentucky linebacking core. This is not me trying to be a hot take artist, but I'm telling you right now, Jordan Wright, who was all over the place in that Florida game, DeAndre Square, Jacquez Jones, J.J. Weaver, that might be the best linebacking core in the SEC. Don't believe me? Watch the Florida game. Watch how they played. Watch how they'll play this year. They don't have the help around them that an Alabama or Georgia does. That's a damn good linebacking unit, and they showed out in their win against Florida. And, yeah, finally, I give you the Sun Belt. This is a great story. The Sun Belt now is the Power 6 league, with all deference to the American. Georgia Southern, think about this. Think about the money that changed hands in order for big-time like A&M paid App State $1.5 million to put their season sideways. By the way, did anybody know the coach of App State? I'll admit I had to look it up. Sean Clark.
Yeah.
Sean Clark was an assistant there since 2016. He replaced Eli Drinkwitz, who replaced Scott Satterfield. Who was Sean Clark? He's a former player there. He played at App State. He was a coach there. He was a player there. He knows the culture. If you've ever been to Boone for an App State football game, it's a special, special place. I love doing the one playoff game I did there. Congratulations to App State. A Sun Belt member. Mentioned Old Dominion a week ago. How many people knew Old Dominion was in the Sun Belt? Georgia Southern. Where are they? The Sun Belt. They racked up 642 yards against Nebraska. Let me repeat that because Scott Frost doesn't run the defense. They racked up 642 yards against Nebraska. Oy vey. Georgia State, by the way, had North Carolina beat the week earlier. They could easily be on this list. My point is the Sun Belt has very quietly become the best Group 5 league.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean that, again, as a compliment, not a disparaging remark at all. And I think because there's been so much movement and realignment, and we're so focused on the Power 5, we kind of forget who's in there. Coastal Carolina. I had their bowl game last year. That was their first bowl game in history. Coastal's become, I mean, they're on everybody's map now. The boys from Conway, not Myrtle Beach, Conway, South Carolina. James Madison was a 1AA powerhouse. They're 2-0. Marshall, proud program, proud tradition. The big win, of course, against Notre Dame. Georgia State, located here in Atlanta, they've already had great success in the Sun Belt, regular in bowl games. They've got a nice stadium. They're on the rise. Louisiana, where Billy Napier came from, we know what they've done. South Alabama has pulled off upsets. Louisiana Monroe, they handed Nick Saban a loss at Alabama in his first year. Troy has pulled off upsets, beat LSU not that long ago. Southern Miss used to be a very popular team that would stun people going back to the Brett Favre days. So, like, this is a good league, good fan bases that love college football, predominantly in the Southeast, a little bit spread out now. So, under the radar, not just because they picked up a couple of upsets, the Sun Belt as a whole, the people that have been in charge of that league have done it right, and they have quietly become the best Group 5 league. So kudos to the Sun Belt.
Yeah, and I think Southern Miss could be on their way back. I think this is the best thing that could have happened to them is going to the Sun Belt, because they're playing like-minded and similar schools and things like that. And people forget Georgia Southern was a national championship level FCS program, just like App State.
Mm-hmm.
They've kind of hit it out of the park. The Sun Belt has taken advantage of all this realignment, and done a pretty good job piecing together a hell of a league right now. I think it's going to be very interesting to see what teams win and what teams make it out alive. I mean, and congrats too to the Mountaineers. They are playing they have College Game Day coming to Boone this weekend.
Isn't that great? And does everybody know the story on that? Do you know where they were going to go?
Probably Texas A&M.
That's right. They were going to go to A&M.
A&M Miami.
They called an audible at the last second.
We're going to Boone.
We'll go to Boone, man. We'll have a good time in Boone.
Yeah.
By the way, you can't say Georgia Southern without mentioning Irk Russell, who is like legendary over there. App State is that's the other thing. Like, those places, there's a few teams, Division I, quite frankly, where football's an afterthought. Like, they have a football team and you don't even know why. Right? You just we're supposed to, so we have a football team. Those places are actually very passionate. All those schools that we just talked about, like they go to games, they tailgate, they give a damn. Like, it's a nice setup over there for so many of those schools. So congratulations to the Sun Belt, Fun Belt. I got to do this before we get to. Is there anything else before we get to the picks?
Nah.
Okay. I promise I can't use that term. I could, but I'm going to be kinder. I messed the bed last week because I've been promising one of our avid listeners here on JC and Morgan. Again, we've got fans all over the place. We got fans at different schools, and they're not all Power 5. We got a huge UCF fan, UCF John. He went to school there. I've known him for a long time, and he was a UCF fan before being a UCF fan was cool. And he's not one of these obnoxious UCF fans that like puts a sign in their front yard saying "National Champions." No, he's not that guy. He is excited about the Big 12 as well as he should be. So I promised him we'd give, and Mike Oresco will be happy about this as well, an around the league overview, but I would do it in 30 seconds for the AAC. Now, the first time he did like 12 paragraphs. I was like, bro, we got other fish to fry than the AAC. So he kept it quicker. So I'm going to do it. Put me on the clock. And here we go. UCF will be at FAU. UCF coming off a tough loss to Louisville. Ole Miss transfer John Reese Plumlee. Solid first half, difficult second half. UCF defense played well. Big game for UCF to knock off the boys from Boca. AAC games of the week. Houston taking on Kansas. Houston coming off a double overtime loss to Texas Tech. We already talked about what Kansas did. And SMU at Maryland. Both teams are 2-0. SMU is supposed to make some noise in the AAC this year. A good road test for the Ponies to see where they're at. Boom! Was that under 30?
Well done.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of a shocking loss. I mean, Louisville, the transitive property never works in college football, but Louisville's struggling. I mean, you talk about a potential hot seat guy, Scott Satterfield, who came from App State. They got the doors blown off of them by Syracuse. Let me repeat that. Syracuse, Dino Babers blew them out 31-7. And, so they're going to UCF as an underdog. Reese Plumlee's difficult to stop. And they went in there and won a tough game. I think if I'm UCF, I'm a little concerned that happened, even though that's a Power 5 versus a G5. But SMU Maryland should be interesting. Maryland's actually off to a 2-0 start. They hadn't played anybody, but that'll be a big test for the Terps and Mike Loxley to see if they can get bowl eligible again.
One other game we should mention, it was immensely entertaining, and it was one that when I got done, I was still awake in the hotel room, and it was still going on, was BYU and their win over Baylor. Again, BYU, and I think I can't say this enough. What the Big 12 did, the 4 teams that they're about to add after the heartbreaking losses of Texas, Oklahoma, kudos to that league, because those are 4 great additions. They really are. BYU's always very difficult team to beat. Huge built-in fan base, and they did it. And that crowd was unbelievable. They beat the defending Big 12 champions, and of course they will be in the Big 12 before long with UCF, with Cincinnati, with Houston.
And they go to Eugene this weekend.
That's right.
BYU goes to Oregon.
A sneaky good game. Good point. Good point. All right. Speaking of good games, so last week in the picks, Michael, how did we do? And then what do you have for us? We do not know which games you're going to pick.
All right, Mike, you were a svelte 3-2 against the spread. JC, a little bit of work to make up ground here. 1-4 last year against the spread. You guys only differed on 2 games overall in the Southern Cal Stanford game and the UK and Florida game there. But yeah, Baylor did not do you any favors. Speaking of BYU there, Iowa State coming back and knocking off Iowa. That was the one win for UJC, and then obviously Pitt in a heartbreaking loss at home to Tennessee.
Yeah, here I am. I'm praising BYU. They screwed me over. I could have been 4-1 if Baylor. That was like the game of college kicking ineptitude if you watched it. And then, I feel like JC deserve a moral victory on Pitt because we picked them to cover the 6.5. They forced overtime. Mm-hmm. So we were right in our line of thinking, but this is why I don't gamble, because you could be right in analyzing the game and then still lose the bet on a 6.5 point spread that you're getting 6.5 because they lose by 7 in overtime. But I digress.
You digress. Well, you guys were about to, you led me in anyway to the first game that I was going to speak of with BYU and Oregon. Let's just stay on the topic there, guys. Heading all the way out to Eugene, as you said, JC, the Ducks, 3.5 point home favorites over BYU, who just scored that big win last weekend.
I'm going to take BYU. I think they're a tough, hard-nosed football team. Normally, now will Oregon win the game straight up? Yeah, but I think BYU will play within 3.5. I expect it to go right down to the wire for BYU to get in there and really challenge them. And I think the Big 12 membership too is probably energized their football program, because I think they feel like, hey, we keep building and we keep coaching and we keep winning. That conference entry is really going to help us here in a couple of years. So I'm going to go. I just haven't been that impressed with Oregon. I know they had a big win last week, but I think that I think BYU goes in there and plays them tough.
For the same reasons, I will take BYU in the points. Learned my lesson from last week.
All right, got you both down for the Cougars there. Let's go to the plains of Auburn. The Nittany Lions of Penn State come to town, and deep in SEC country, 2.5 point favorites are the Fighting James Franklin's. 2.5 point favorites to Penn State, guys.
That's a tough one for me, because I could see a scenario where Auburn wins. I know they struggled with San Jose State. They weren't too much better against Mercer. But, man, Penn State, they kind of survived. Heck, I'm going to go with Penn State to win by a field goal, so they'll cover the 2.5.
Man, these are games I would stay away from if I was actually betting.
Yeah.
If Bo Nix was playing, as much as Bo Nix takes a lot of crap, like I'd actually pick Auburn to win this.
But Bo Nix is playing for Oregon. He's playing for Oregon.
Yeah. I really hate everything about picking this game. You know what? Because Harsin really, really needs this game. I'll take Auburn at home. I'll take Auburn at Jordan-Hare. Crowd will be rocking. I will take the Auburn Tigers.
All right. We got you guys down. The first difference this week between the two of you there. We move on. Team that we've spent some time talking about, Texas A&M hosting Miami. Do the Aggies rebound after an embarrassing loss there at home? 5.5-point home favorites in spite of the loss. Maybe it would have been higher. Who knows? But Miami Hurricanes in College Station, Aggies 5.5-point home favorites.
Well, Miami hadn't been very impressive either. This was supposed to be the resurgence of Miami. Tyler Van Dyke. At times, it looked more like Dick Van Dyke. That's a problem.
Hey, but Dick Van Dyke's pretty fleet of feet, man.
He was before he recently passed away. He was. He had some. Yeah. Apparently, you missed that on the ticker, but Dick is no longer with us. But he was good for a time, and he was the guy that had those PSAs, right? Stop, drop, and roll, Dick, roll. Remember for the PSA for the fire? Anybody? All right, go back and YouTube that sucker. I'm stalling here, as you can probably tell, because this is another one that I would definitely stay away from. I don't love either team. Right now.
What makes it so fascinating, Mike?
I know. I'm going to take Miami plus the points. A&M very well could win it, but how am I going to lay 5.5 for A&M? I'll take the points. I'll take Miami. It kills me to do that.
It's, this is a big game. Everybody's going to talk about how big of a game it is for Jimbo Fisher. I think it's a big game for Mario Cristobal. I mean, they're 12th right now. Sure, there's been times they haven't looked good, especially against Southern Miss last week. Have gotten off to slow start. So they're going to have to get off to a good start on the road so A&M continues to doubt itself. But I'm going to take Miami in the points. I feel dirty almost saying that, and not because I think Miami's dirty. It's because every other time I've taken Miami in a key situation like this, the last 10 years or so, I've been disappointed. But A&M's issues really kind of started the week before against Sam Houston State. That was a 31-0 win, but it was not all that impressive. I think Miami has enough offense and defense to get it done on the road, and the howls will continue in College Station. The rumbling will get louder.
All right. Agreement on that one. Now, final two for you here. A couple of more intriguing interconference matchups. So we've got Michigan State on the road at Washington. The Huskies, 3.5-point home favorites against the Fighting Mel Tuckers.
It's intriguing. I'm going to go with Michigan State. And I like Washington's coach, Kalen DeBoer. I think he's really good. A lot of respect for that program. But I think Michigan State's getting more and more solid by the year. Did Mel Tucker deserve $11 million a year? I would never go that far. But I do think they play more consistent than maybe they used to. Not just not quite sold on Washington yet. It's a tough place to play, but I'm going to go with the Spartans to cover.
Yeah, Michigan State's got a heck of a sugar daddy. I was reading an article about him. He's a graduate and made just millions, if not billions. I think he's either a hedge fund guy or a commercial real estate guy. So that's how you get a coach making that kind of money. I'll take Michigan State. You say you're getting 3.5?
Yeah.
I'll take the points. I mean, what am I buying in Washington right now? I'm not really sold on Washington. So yeah, I'll take the points in Michigan State.
All right. We'll see if we got one more opportunity for you guys to disagree on one here. This is one I had to rub my eyes and make sure that I wasn't looking at like a last year's bowl matchup. I just didn't expect to see these two teams that had slipped my radar as an early season at a conference matchup. But Texas Tech Red Raiders on the road to Raleigh to face number 16 NC State. Texas Tech getting a double overtime win over number 25 Houston last weekend. So we've got the Wolfpack as 10.5-point home favorites over Texas Tech coming to town. What do you think?
You can go ahead and put me down for Texas Tech.
Yeah, I know where JC's going. He's not exactly part of the Dave Doran fan club. Another name mentioned for the Nebraska job. I think by week's end, the three of us will be mentioned for the Nebraska job. NC State's got a supposed NFL quarterback who hasn't always played like an NFL quarterback this year. Texas Tech is well coached. Yeah, I'll take the Red Raiders. It's a high number. I'll take a lot of underdogs. I'll take Texas Tech as well.
All right, one disagreement this week for you guys, and that was the Auburn and Penn State game.
Yeah, and I anguished over that as well.
That's a tough one to pick because it's just like you want to kind of lean toward Penn State because Auburn struggled last week against San Jose State. But, I mean, Harsin, you look at last year, they had some games where they didn't look worth a flip, and then they'd come out and turn it on and go beat Arkansas or something. So,
yeah.
I just, the 2.5, if it were 3.5, I'd probably take the Tigers, but 2.5, I'll just go ahead and take Penn State.
There you have it. Again, want to thank everybody for tuning in. Want to thank our title sponsor, Blue Delta Jeans, BlueDeltaJeans.com. They were actually in Austin this past weekend getting the game day crew fitted up. If you want to get fitted up, you can either go to their store in Oxford or you can just go online. You actually get yourself sized up virtually. It's pretty simple. Take a few steps, do it yourself at home, and then before you know it, you pick the jeans that you want, and they're at your house, and you will not find better quality jeans. That much I can promise you. Go to BlueDeltaJeans.com. Boys, it's been fun. We will do it again next week. What do you say?
All right, definitely. Looking forward to it.
All right, that'll do it for J.C. Sherbert and Michael Haney behind the proverbial glass. Mike Morgan saying so long for now. We'll see you next week on J.C. and Morgan.